looking for a beer that's fruity, easy to make, and perfect for a hot summer day, then you're in the right place. I'm Trent Musho, and you're watching The Brew Show. Stick around and learn how you can make this at home. Right now we're in the dog days of summer, and I was looking for something refreshing and easy to sip on. So I took a wheat ale recipe that I had and added 5 pounds of watermelon to it, as a cheers to summer. This is a perfect recipe for beginners or for your first all-grain brew. If you're new to my page, be sure to subscribe so you can learn more about how to brew your own beer and get more great recipes like this. Now, let's brew. For this recipe, I'll be using the brew in a bag method. And if you're not familiar with that, be sure to check out my how to brew video. I'll be making a 5.5 gallon batch, but feel free to scale this up or down based on what you want. To start, I take 6.9 gallons and heat it up to 161 degrees. Once the water is heated up a bit, I add my water adjustments. This is an optional step, but it can impact the final flavor of your beer. Next I add the grain bag, and then I add the grains. I'm going to be using 56% Pale Malt and 40% wheat malt, in this case red wheat malt. The reason I'm going so high with the wheat malt is because I really want that sweetness that the wheat malt gives. And now we'll round it out with 10 Lovibond crystal malt. That's just to add a little more color. I plan to mash at 154 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 minutes. This is to help accentuate the overall mouthfeel of the beer. It can be a bit of a challenge to keep your mash temperature consistent, so what I try to do is occasionally I'll stir the mash to try and keep the temperature even throughout the mash tun. I'll also occasionally turn the burner back on if I notice it drops too much from my target temperature. Alright, after the 45 minutes, it's time to pull the bag. Once you feel like you got everything, go ahead and dump those grains. And prepare to boil for 15 minutes. Traditionally, brewers tend to boil for about 60 minutes or longer, but since we're only going to use one hop and we're not trying to get too much bitterness out of it, we're only going to boil for 15 minutes. Speaking of hops, once we've reached our boil, we're going to add our 1 ounces of Magnum and set our timer for 15 minutes. The reason I went with Magnum here is because it has a clean bitterness and I don't want it to get in the way of the watermelon flavor. Have you guys ever had a watermelon beer before? Let me know in the comments below. After I throw in the hops, I put in the wort chiller. Once the 15 minutes is up, we'll turn off the burner and turn on our wort chiller. This is a wort chiller I built, and I use a pump to recirculate the water. So when the cold water goes in, it comes through the tubing and comes back out into the same bucket. And then I just replenish it with ice until it's cooled down to about 70 degrees. At which point, I transfer into the fermenter. Here I'm using a PET carboy, but you can use a food grade safe bucket. They're one of the least expensive options, and you can find them at your local hardware store. Now I'll take a quick hydrometer reading to get the original gravity. In this case, it's 1.046. This number will help us determine our final alcohol percentage, as well as let us know when the beer is done fermenting. For the yeast, I'm going to use a SafAle US-05 standard ale yeast, and I like it because it doesn't impact too much flavor onto the beer and leaves you with a nice refreshing ale. Then I shake up the fermenter to work in some oxygen, but remember to limit oxygen exposure after fermentation has begun. I pop an airlock on, and I set it in a cool, dark place for about 7 days to allow the yeast plenty of time to chew on those sugars. A week later, I noticed the airlock activity had slowed down, so I took my final gravity reading. I got a 1.011, which means this beer clocks in at 4.6% alcohol. So, everything up until this point, we've made your standard wheat ale, which means we're missing one ingredient. But before that, we need to take a trip back in time, 1 day ago. Now for this recipe, you're going to need to grow your own watermelon from seed. Nah, just kidding. You can use any watermelon that you have, as long as it tastes good. These watermelon are called Sugar Baby. They're supposed to be really sweet, and they grow pretty small compared to most watermelon. This one weighs about 5 pounds. Next, I cut the watermelon up into small cubes and froze them overnight. Fast forward to the next day, we pull the watermelon out of the freezer and put them into sanitized hop socks or mesh bags. The reason we froze the fruit is to kill off any bacteria that might be present on it. Putting the watermelon in the bag also keeps the seeds of the watermelon from getting in our tubing. Once the bags are filled up, I added them to the keg, closed the keg up, connected the CO2 tank, and purged the keg. I did this a few times to make sure there's no oxygen present in the keg. Then I open it up and transfer the beer in like I normally would. Now if you're not kegging, you can still do this, you'll just need to use a secondary fermenter. You place the frozen watermelon into your secondary fermenter and then transfer the beer into that fermenter. Then after the watermelon has infused for a couple days, you can transfer it into your bottles. Since I'm just kegging, I transfer the beer in, close it up. I set my regulator to 10 psi, let it sit for about a week, and then it's ready to drink. What a beautiful color this beer has. It's slightly gold with a bit of haze from that wheat malt we used. The mouthfeel is very smooth and creamy. You almost get a hint of vanilla. The melon flavor is subtle and doesn't hit you over the head. If you want to change it up, try using peaches instead of watermelon. I've tried it before and I really liked it. You can experiment with all kinds of fruit. So please give this one a try and let me know if you do. And if you have any questions about the recipe or any of the brewing processes, let me know in the comments below. And be sure to subscribe for more recipes and tutorials. Thanks for watching.